Our story continues. Odyssean heard the shouting just as he was building up the nerve to tell Lilia that she had to stay behind no matter what she desired. He had already failed twice this evening, and the fact that both attempts had ended up in lovemaking had not assuaged his guilt much. Now, just as his breath and strength had finally returned, and he had been determined not to fail a third time, what sounded like his brother's voice echoed throughout Master Ethan's house. The people of Partha seemed to consider it Odyssean's now, but he planned to use it only for a day or two more, and even with that much guilt, once he was gone, Lilia and the others were welcome to make it their own long enough to sort out their lives. Unfortunately, it seemed that Mendel needed sorting out immediately. Odyssean rose from the bed to see what was the matter.
"Do not be long,"
Lilia murmured, her tone seeking to entice him anew. With a nod, he put some clothing on and stepped out, at which point he nearly collided with his brother. "Odyssean, praise be, I feared the worst." Mendel's tension was contagious.
"What? Is it Peace Warders or Morlu? The Cathedral's Inquisitors?"
No. Mendel looked him up and down. "Odyssean, you are well?"
"I am."
The older brother did not bother to mention his intentions just now. Mendel could learn about them later.
"Now, what's this all about?"
"I feared... I thought..."
"What?"
With a look of chagrin, Mendel shook his head. "Nothing. It was a nightmare, Odyssean. Just a foolish nightmare." His eyes glanced past his sibling to where Odyssean realized an unclothed Lilia could be partially seen in the bed. "I'm sorry. Forgive me. I do not know what to think." Mulling it over, Odyssean suggested,
"You've been up all hours, Mendel. Day and night. That's not good. You've helped me a lot in soothing the spirits of the Parthans after Master Ethan's slaughter. I think you just need some rest."
Uncertainty tinged his brother's voice. "Perhaps." Again, the eyes flickered past Odyssean. "I am very sorry to have intruded." Before Odyssean could say anything, Mendel whirled and rushed off to his room. Shutting the door behind him, Odyssean returned to Lilia. She smiled languidly as he slipped in next to her.
"Your brother is all right?"
"He's overexhausted."
The blonde woman ran soft fingers over his chest, toying with his hair.
"And are you?"
"Not in the least."
Odyssean returned, taking her in his arms.
"Let me show you."
3 hours passed. 3 hours in which he had drunken deep of Lilia again. 3 hours since they had lain side by side. 3 hours that now saw Odyssean just finishing the saddling of his horse. It was the only way to resolve the situation. No more thinking, no more explanations. After assuring himself that the noblewoman was asleep, he had cautiously risen and dressed. With soft footfalls that would have made Achilleus proud, Odyssean had then slipped out of the room and through the house. When he had come across the few guards on duty, they swearing to watch over him as they had their former employer, none saw him sneak past. They could not be faulted for that, however, for it seemed that Odyssean's gift worked for him without trouble this time. He wished the men to look the other way, and they had. It was with growing guilt that Odyssean rode quietly through the streets, and, at last, out of Partha. The people were just beginning to understand what was happening to them. As recent as he was to his own abilities, the son of Diomedes knew that he understood them far more than anyone else did. Odyssean was also the one responsible for their transformations. All that demanded that he return to the town immediately and take responsibility. But always weighing more heavily were the deaths. It was possible that he was making a terrible decision in abandoning everyone and riding to Khajan himself. Yet, Odyssean shook his head and rode on. He could ill afford to think of any more yets. The trees surrounded him like silent sentinels. The night seemed blacker than usual. Odyssean tried to encourage his mount to a swifter pace, but the animal moved tentatively, almost as if it feared something lurking in the shadows. The trail wound around a series of low hills. There was a well-traveled road leading from Partha to Kajan, but Odyssean wanted to make it less simple for anyone to follow him. Other than Achilleos, who would understand his sudden departure, there were probably few who could track him. Taking a lesser trail would also guarantee less possible encounters with other travelers. His belongings were meager, consisting mainly of the clothes on his back, a worn but workable sword, and a few bits of food he had managed to gather on his way out. His impulsive departure had given him little time to do much else. He had one sack of water, filled near the stables, but assumed that somewhere soon he would pass another source. Thinking of the water sack, Odyssean suddenly felt very thirsty. He tugged the pouch free from the saddle and drank his fill. The contents were a bit brackish, but tolerable. As he swallowed the last, Odyssean, eyeing the dark path ahead, considered his trek. The lowlands and Kajan awaited to the east. The beginning of the jungle regions was not that far off. If he continued riding in his present direction, he would soon descend into the warmer climes. Cyrus had spoken in the past of the abrupt change that took place down there, almost as if some great mischievous spirit had divided up the world at a whim, not planning. One day, Cerinthia's father had told him that you would be wearing a nice, sensible coat that kept you safe from the snow, and the next, you would find yourself gasping in the sweltering heat, slapping bird-sized mosquitoes every step. Odyssean had never entirely believed the man's tales, although some of the traders who had come to Sarum had proven the exotic did exist in the east. There had been a handful over the years with a swarthy skin and long, narrow eyes which were supposedly predominant the further into the jungles one went. Rumor had it that there were men darker yet, with flesh like coal. Others were supposedly to be golden in color. The mage clans were said to be filled with such strange races of men, and Kajan itself was supposedly a melting pot. Lilia was proof of that, Master Ethan having even guessed just where her family would have been from. The very thought of approaching a vast city by himself suddenly proved very daunting to the simple farmer. He wished that he could have at least been accompanied by the noblewoman who knew Kajan best, yet she was also the one he least wanted near him should trouble arise. The fear that something terrible might befall her had been the most driving reason for his abrupt flight. Her face filled his mind. Perhaps one day they would be able to reunite, but not after Odyssean made certain that it was safe to do so. Yet Lilia would always be with him, even if only in his memories and his heart.
Odyssean.
Came a soft voice suddenly.
My love.
He dropped the water sack, then twisted in the saddle. Behind him, to his disbelieving eyes, was the noblewoman herself. She was completely dressed and riding a large, dark steed that he did not recall.
Lilia, what are you doing here?
Her smile alone began melting his resolve.
I've come to be with you, naturally.
You should have stayed in Partha.
He insisted, trying to gather his strength.
I left you with the others, for your own sake.
She urged the huge mount forward.
You may leave the others, but you can never leave me, Odyssean. I began this with you, and I will end this with you.
He was touched by her dedication and wanted to take her in his arms, but recalled the evils of Malik. If she stayed at his side, Lilia would forever be a target of men such as the High Priest, or worse, their masters. No matter how much he yearned for her, Odyssean had to let her go.
No, Lilia. It has to end here for us. I don't want you hurt. I don't want you dead.
But you saw what I managed against Malik, and think how powerful he was. I can defend myself, my love, especially from those who would separate us.
It was a powerful argument, Odyssean himself having been hard-pressed against the servant of the Primus. Still, he understood from his own abilities that Lilia might have very well been merely lucky. The next time she could discover herself entirely defenseless against some murderous foe. The thought of what would happen then was all he needed to regain his determination completely.
No, Lilia. I can't afford to think like that. If anything would happen to you, it would be too much. You've got to go back. No argument. Stay with the others, but don't consider coming after me again.
Instead of obeying, the blonde woman dismounted.
I will not go. I will follow you wherever you ride.
Lilia.
She left her horse behind, not at all concerned, it seemed, that it could wander off. Stretching her arms to Odyssean, Lilia continued.
Come, hold me once more. Kiss me once more. Prove to me that you can leave me behind. Perhaps if you say you can, I might reconsider.
Although he knew that it was foolish to do so, Odyssean also dismounted. Just one hug and kiss. It would give him something to remember. He would still insist that she return to the town. He would not weaken in any way. But as she melted into his arms, as her lips found his, Odyssean's will drained away again. What if Lilia did ride after him? Would she not be more likely in harm's way, searching for him rather than being at his side? Surely, with how he was learning to control his gifts, he could keep her safe. A shiver suddenly coursed through him as the kiss continued. Eyes closing, Odyssean pulled back. A momentary weakness overcame him, and it was all he could do to stand.
Odyssean? Are you ill?
Almost as quickly as it had vanished, his strength returned. He shook his head. Opening his eyes revealed his vision to be blurred. Odyssean blinked several times, trying to restore it.
I think it's passing,
he muttered. A vague shape that had to be Lilia began to coalesce in front of him. Odyssean frowned as she took on more definition. Something was wrong. She seemed different, almost as if he managed to stifle a shout, but could not keep from stumbling farther away from her. Without meaning to, the son of Diomedes collided with his mount. The animal turned. Odyssean heard it snort. Then the horse began to shy away, as if it, too, saw something unsettling.
What is it?
Lilia asked anxiously.
Odyssean, what is it?
He could not tell her, for he was not certain himself. What stood before him was no longer the blonde noblewoman. Rather, it was taller and hideously scaled, with a mass of fiery quills for hair. Quills that ran down the spine to a tail ending in savage barbs. Where the delicate hands had been were now clawed fingers, 4, not 5. Worse, the feet were like hooves, yet splayed too. The body was unclad, and, although monstrous, still very, very female. The lush curves enticed, drawing his eyes despite his dismay. But most horrific of all was that, when he looked up into the face with its burning orbs that had no pupils and teeth designed for shredding, he could still see the features that he recognized as the woman he loved.
Are you ill?
The creature asked in her voice, a black forked tongue darting in and out with each word. It was and was not the image from his nightmare, and, for the moment, Odyssean prayed that he had been asleep the entire time. Yet sense told him that this was reality, and that what he saw of Lilia was no illusion.
What are you?
I am your Lilia,
she declared, sounding confused and slightly irritated.
What else could I be?
Her tail slapped the earth angrily. His eyes shifted to it, then quickly back to her face. However, she noted his reaction and her expression grew more terrible. A word escaped Lilia before she could stop herself.
Lucian.
Lucian? What does he have to do with this?
Asked Odyssean, trying desperately to make sense of things.
It is obviously a spell of the Primus. He has transformed me into this.
Lilia reached for him, imploring.
Only your love can save me.
He started toward her, and then some instinct bade him hold back. Odyssean recalled how she had glanced back at the tail with little surprise, as if its being there was a perfectly natural thing. A great pit opened up in his stomach. He shook his head, trying vehemently to reject what he was beginning to believe. This could not be happening. There had to be an explanation. Lilia could not be this.
Odyssean,
the demonic figure beseeched.
please, hold me. I'm frightened by your coldness. My love, only you can restore me.
Lilia,
Again, he stepped toward her, and again, his instinct was to retreat a moment later. Odyssean stared closely at her, noting minute details that seemed to show a comfort, a familiarity with her current form. Next to him, his mount continued to grow more and more anxious. The horse began struggling with him. Odyssean could barely hold on to the reins. In contrast, though, Lilia's steed stood still. Too still. For one so very familiar with animals, it was almost as if the black horse was mesmerized. His frantic mind raced for answers. Maybe this was not Lilia at all. Maybe she was still in bed, and this demon had assumed her role. Yes, that could very well be it, he supposed. Drawing his sword, he growled,
keep away from me, demon. I've slain others of your kind. You will not fool me with that voice.
The figure looked perplexed.
Odyssean, it is Lilia. Remember our first meeting? How you found me admiring the horses? Remember how I insisted on coming to you when you were unjustly locked away? Have you forgotten everything?
She went on to name a half-dozen more incidents with enough detail to drain away his hope that this was not her. In doing so, she might have thought that she would pull him back to her. But all Lilia actually succeeded in doing was reinforcing the fact that Odyssean had been cavorting with something monstrous. Yet despite that growing horror, the farmer could not keep his eyes off of Lilia. There was an unnatural seductiveness to her, so much so that his body desired to crush itself against hers despite what his mind knew. Her every movement enticed, as if, as she pleaded innocence, she also sought to use her wiles to ensnare him. Shuddering, Odyssean forced himself to look away. As he did, he heard a sharp, furious hiss.
Look at me, Odyssean.
Lilia abruptly cooed.
Look at what you have had, and what you can have again, and again, and again.
Something told him that if he looked, it would be his undoing. His will was only mortal, whereas that with which he had lain could never be called such.
Get away from me, whatever you are,
he demanded, still looking slightly to the side.
Leave, or I'll do with you as I did the other demons.
He expected anger, or perhaps fear, as she would surely recall how he had disposed of the foul creature sent forth by Malik. Malik. Suddenly that too made more sense. Odyssean had been stunned by the swift ending to the cunning cleric, but that Lilia was more than she seemed explained much. Poor Malik had not known exactly what it was he had faced. Perhaps he had suspected, but even that would not have been enough. The irony might have made Odyssean smile if not for his own circumstances. A strange sound came from Lilia's direction. Not a hiss, not a snarl, but laughter that tore at his soul.
Poor little Odyssean, my sweet darling, so naive, so believing. You were ever too trusting when it came to what I said.
That almost made him face her, which was perhaps as she wanted it.
What do you mean?
Have you not wondered at how quickly your vaunted abilities have blossomed? Have you not wondered why all others, save for your loving Lilia, have so far shown so little progress?
He had, and the implications in her tone set the hair on his neck stiffening.
Yes, he sees the truth now, or at least a hint of it. Yes, dear, sweet Odyssean, I have guided you every step of the way. What you do in great part because of me, not yourself. It was I who brought forth the storm, who guided the lightning, who caused most of your desire to become reality.
And more than that, he knew suddenly.
And who slaughtered one missionary, then slew another with a knife of mine.
This caused her to giggle, a sound once musical to the human, but now filling him with loathing.
The stage had to be set for you, my love. And what were they anyway, but pawns of a treacherous lover and a fool of a brother?
Odyssean tried to digest the last. If she was to be believed, both the Primus and the Prophet were known to her very well. One was of her blood, assuming that such flowed through her, while the other had assumed the same role as Odyssean. But before him, the knowledge only made Odyssean's consternation grow. His entire existence was nothing but delusion. He was not this powerful force, but rather a puppet, her puppet. But a small part of him rebelled at that thought, reminding Odyssean that this encounter was surely not as she planned matters. She had spat the name Lucian out before she could help herself. Yet, if Odyssean was only a weak pawn, why take this action? Why had Lucian just not destroyed him? Odyssean could only assume that he was either of some value to the Primus, or that Lucian could not do away with him. At the moment, Odyssean doubted the latter, but the former still made some sense, based more than once on Malik's words. And if it did, it had to be because there was something to the power growing within the farmer. Why else would Lilia, if that was what the demoness was called, have chosen him in the first place?
I told you before,
he finally said, trying to sound confident and defiant.
Leave now, or else.
Again, she giggled.
Oh, my darling Odyssean, how I have come to adore your little stubborn streak. I would say it was from my side, but it could also be from his. They, so arrogant, so righteous.
When he said nothing, Lilia continued.
You do not even know about that, do you? You do not even know your history. All of this I would have revealed to you in time, when you were ready. Shall I tell you now? We can still be together. You can still hold me, caress me.
Feeling his will crumbling, Odyssean ducked back. Unfortunately, the horse, still fighting with him, used that moment to pull the reins free. Odyssean spun around, chasing after them, but the horse was already too far away. He watched the animal race off into the night.
Poor Odyssean. But you do not need that weak creature. I can teach you to fly or materialize anywhere. Once more, the Nephilim will rise, and this time, they will assume their rightful place. I will assume my rightful place, no matter how the high heavens and the burning hells cry out against it.
There was a manic tone in her voice, a hint of madness that he had never heard. Without thinking, Odyssean looked at her. Her eyes immediately snared his. Her lips parted and her tongue flashed out, licking as if about to devour a tasty tidbit.
When he cast me out for what he thought eternity, he underestimated my resolve. I had slain all of them for the sake of the children. Why would I let the children be his to mold forever in his imperious image? They were special. They were more than either demons or angels. I saw then that they were to be the future, the true end to the infernal struggle.
Lilia raised one clawed hand, and Odyssean felt his right foot slide forward. She beckoned with a single finger, and his left followed suit. With effort, he slowed his momentum, but it was only a matter of time before he would stand directly in front of her. Obviously aware of this, she continued to talk as if all was well between them, as if he was happy to know that he had lain with a monster.
What you have called a gift, my love, is that and much more. You, all humans, are the spawn of our coupling. From demon and angel came the Nephilim, greater than anything ever created in the cosmos. The force I stirred within you, the force which I found begging to be released, is nothing less than your birthright. He would see it smothered, and all of you kept as so much docile cattle to serve his vanity. But I can offer far more.
She reached toward him.
Much, much more.
Gritting his teeth, Odyssean growled.
The only thing you can offer me is a way to forget what happened.
Do you truly wish to forget everything, my darling? Do you truly wish to forget me?
He finally managed to stop dead in his tracks, face contorting from effort. Odyssean retorted,
Nothing would please me more.
Is that so?
Lilia's eyes flared darkly.
Is that so, my love?
To his horror, Odyssean discovered himself stumbling toward her at almost breakneck speed. His best efforts proved laughable, and it suddenly came to Odyssean that all this time, Lilia had been toying with him. Not for a moment had he truly been able to stand against her power. His birthright, as she had called it, was nothing more than a hollow lie. Her arms embraced him as he reached her. He, in turn, wrapped his own around her scaled form, the quills running down her back, stabbing his flesh. Her body was a furnace, yet so very soft in the places that mattered. Odyssean felt his lust rise up to do battle with his repugnance.
Let us kiss, to see how much you wish to forget.
Lilia mocked. He could do no less than obey. His body reacted with a passion he could not quell.
No.
Odyssean shouted in his mind, even as he and Lilia pressed against one another.
No. I won't become hers again.
A sharp pain in his lower lip made him wince. She had bitten him. Odyssean felt her tongue taste the blood, and the action caused him to shiver. Lilia finally pulled back. Her expression said it all. She knew that while part of him was utterly disgusted, another was entirely under her domination. The demoness chuckled. Odyssean experienced a sense of foreboding. A tremendous force struck him full, sending the human flying through the air as he had once thought he had done to Malik's peace warders. Odyssean let out a cry as he soared among the trees, certain he would hit one. However, despite the odds so against him, he did not so much as graze a limb. Instead, Odyssean finally dropped to the ground, tumbling hard and rolling several yards farther. Every bone felt as if it was breaking, every muscle shrieked. When the son of Diomedes finally came to a rest, he could not even so much as move a finger. However, despite the distance Odyssean had flown, he immediately sensed Lilia's presence close by. Sure enough, she loomed over him but a breath later.
The great Odyssean, changer of worlds. I think you understand now just how great you truly are.
Damn.
Was all he could say, his lungs still pleading for air.
Still defiant?
She knelt down, giving him, despite the darkness, a very close look at her charms.
A worthy trait. Sometimes.
He could do nothing when she kissed him again. Well aware of his conflicting emotions, Lilia stretched it out longer than the last.
I think you will come around.
The demoness cooed afterward.
But first, one more lesson to be learned, my love. The lesson of just what you are without me.
The wind suddenly raged, howling like a pack of wolves as it tore through the region. The quills atop Lilia's head shook as if alive. The demoness stood and raised her arms, clearly the cause of the shift in weather.
Yes, let us see just what you are without me.
She repeated with a laugh.
Let us see how long your defiance lasts. Not so very long, I think. Eh, my love?
Summoning what strength he could, Odyssean made a desperate lunge at her ankles. What he hoped to do beyond toppling her, the human could not say, but he felt he had to try. His attempt was as pitiful as his earlier arrogance. His fingers barely grazed her scaly hide. Lilia merely stood there, watching his antics.
Not yet, dear Odyssean. You can hold me again when you've been properly chastised. If, of course, you survive the lesson.
She cocked her head.
If.
He snarled and tried again to reach her, but the wind trebled, shoving him with such ferocity that Odyssean was rolled back. The world spun around him for a moment, and once more he was left gasping for air. Without warning, the terrifying gust died. Silence fell over the area. Odyssean's lungs gradually filled. He managed to twist his gaze back, wondering what the temptress would do to him next. But Lilia, if that was indeed her name, was gone. "Let us see what you are without me," she had said. He shuddered, knowing that her absence presaged dire events to come. The demoness had proven quite readily that Odyssean had no true power, that everything had been a hoax perpetuated by her. Visions of inquisitors and peace warders filled his head. He imagined demons in Morlu already waiting in the dark, their thirst for his blood only held in check by their masters. It mattered not which sect. Both the Primus and the Prophet apparently wanted him for his vaunted birthright. However, once they discovered that he was merely an empty shell, a pawn, they would have no further use for him. Worse, those he had led into this would also see him as a man of false promises. They would lose heart, turn against him. His friends would realize that they had given up everything for nothing. Let us see what you are without me. He knew what he was already, the greatest of fools and a condemned man.